Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn more at uber.com/flexibilityworks.
CHEK Podcasts.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Political Capital. I'm your host, Rob Shaw, recording from home this week. So guess what? It is Pet Day on Political Capital. Say hello to Ophelia. You might recognize her. Oh, she's gone already. She has very strong political views, but you might recognize her from CHEK viewers because she was found in a garbage dump in Duncan last year, fostered back to health by Tess Van Straten from CHEK. And I couldn't help but adopt her. So she's one day the future legislature cat. She's already off and gone doing something else. Strong views on electoral reform, but we'll get to that at some other point. Jillian, I see a fuzzy little friend that you have in the frame there.
This is Bruce. He's a big fan of rotisserie chicken, so I'm kind of worried he's a conservative.
That's rotisserie chicken from Costco. Very price sensitive to the. You have like peak cuteness in your house because you have a baby and a kitten baby, and they're rolling around taking pictures together.
Yeah, it's pretty good over here. We're having a summer of cuteness.
And Jeff, you've got a couple dogs.
I've got here Petra the dog and Gretel the dog. They're both originally from the United States, so we get into heated conversations about Trump. Petra's a little bit on the right-wing side there, but it's all done in good fun, and they're good dogs.
Statistically, at least one of them has to be a socialist in your house, right? Is that's sort of how it works?
I think we're also all socialists at the end of the day.
Right, okay.
In this house.
We just don't know it yet.
Yeah.
All right, Allie, I know you don't have any cats or dogs, but I did take the time to do this artist rendition, this mock-up here of what your life would look like with two cats. Peak cuteness. I'm just saying, there's lots of animals to adopt out there if you're interested.
Something to consider.
Let me know. I'll hook you up. Okay, you're going to hear those animals probably in the background during the show, but that's fine because we are going to move on to our first topic of the week, which is the financial numbers. There's an old adage in BC politics and politics in general to follow the money. We got the second quarter financial results from political parties this week. Most of the parties, the NDP at 2.2 million raised in the last 3 months, the sort of April to end of June period. Conservatives at 1.1 million. The Greens at 343-ish thousand, and United didn't release their numbers. Widely believed to be below $1 million, could be as low as $500,000, $600,000. We're not quite sure there. So I've got a graphic that we're just putting up here with the trend lines. There's a lot of data. It essentially shows, though, the Conservatives and the NDP kind of spiking up their donation amounts, their fundraising this quarter as we get ready for the election, and United and the Greens not quite seeing that same sort of spike. So what do we take away from those numbers, Jillian? Let's start with you. Is there anything that stands out when you're seeing those figures?
Well, I think the first thing that comes to mind is just how profound an effect the banning of corporate and union donations has had on the political landscape. When the NDP got voted into their minority government in 2017 with the support of the Greens, that was the first big policy commitment that they both committed to, because prior to that, we had unlimited donations from corporations and unions that really sort of distorted the way that the parties were funded relative to voters. And now things are limited to about $1,300 a year, only from individuals, only from within BC. And we really see how much that's benefited the NDP and to a lesser extent the Greens. NDP just like massively out fundraising everybody and going into this election with a huge war chest, where it used to be the BC Liberals who were able to really just flood the airwaves with ads and out through that outspending. And so I think, just the lasting impact of that policy really stands out to me. And just also obviously how strong the NDP and now the Conservatives are heading into the campaign. They've pretty much caught up to BC United in terms of the war chest that they're going to be going into the election with. They hardly raised any money last year, but now raising $1 million in just a quarter, and they've got, another quarter before the election. I think they're going to be in a much stronger position than we were talking about just a couple months ago.
Yeah, I think the Conservatives this time last year raised something like $65,000 in the same quarter, and now they're at 1.1 million, which is something like a 1,500% increase in a year. Ali, what do those numbers tell us about the realness, which is not a word, of the BC Conservatives after all the polling we've been talking about and the different ideas of who these people are supporting the Conservatives in the last few months?
It's interesting. I've noticed a couple of things when it comes to fundraising between the center-right parties, between the BC United and the Conservatives, and that's, I don't see a whole lot of like big ticketed events from the Conservatives. So I can only then assume that they're truly just out there asking for money, and people are giving it to them in a very grassroots way. Whereas the BC United have continued to rely on these like big ticketed events, which have a lot of upfront costs too. And so not to say that it completely attributed to this stark difference that they have in potential fundraising numbers, but it is very interesting to see like how one continues to rely on what potentially worked a couple of years ago and where another is taking a very different route. These could also be people, and I would be very interested in this, these could also be people who have never even donated to political parties before as well. Given the candidates have been touted as, grassroots people who have never been involved in politics before, this also means that it's a pool of people who have potentially never even donated before. But as we know, it takes a lot of money to run a sophisticated campaign, and now the Conservatives could play in the big leagues. But I do think that this is a little bit for the BC United, the 5 stages of political demise grief. Let me explain. The denial came first, and that was the comparison to 2013. Every time Kevin Falcon says, well, we were down in the polls, and so, we can come back and be victorious this time around. Not the same. You weren't in government. We're not in government right now, and so that's not really going to help. So that's denial. Then the anger. So Kevin Falcon throwing any floor crossers under the bus. That one's pretty legitimate, though. And then came the bargaining, which was very legitimately the merger talks. And now we're in this phase of depression where they've had the mass exodus of unhappy members and now the lack of donations. So we're all very sad about that. And the last will come acceptance on maybe October 19th. We'll see what happens. But I think we're in this 5 stages of political grief with the BC United.
Yeah, unless the acceptance comes earlier. I don't know. We always sort of wonder that. Is there any acceptance for United before the election when they look at numbers like these and think maybe they got to change more dramatically? I don't know. I'm not sure if we're kind of watching that too. But yeah, that's interesting. Jeff, what jumps out at you from these numbers?
Well, first of all, I'm here every day for Elizabeth Kubler-Ross references. It brings me back to my days when I was in seminary very briefly. And I grieve myself.
Wait. You were in what?
I was going to be a United Church minister. And I was
really,
it turns out I was really not very good at it. So they said, what is the opposite of a caring profession? And so I went into journalism.
I thought you were going to say politics, but that's okay. Right.
I progressed into politics. Right. And then the consulting. Okay. But I also grieve for my loss on this panel as the chief detractor of Kevin Falcon. It seems like that role is being usurped by another panelist. But for me, the interesting thing about the numbers is what it says about the political parties and their organization as they head into an election campaign. And what it says to me about the NDP is that they have a really strong organization and they're ready to go. More than just well-resourced, they have the wherewithal in the ground and in the ridings to do the work that's needed to be competitive and win. on this show, we talk an awful lot about kind of what we call in politics the air war. So, the positioning, the message, the communication. There's a whole other part of elections that I think folks at home might see more even than this. And it's the people who are knocking on your doors, the leaflets that you get, the phone calls that you get, the local candidate debates. And it says to me going into this campaign that despite folks saying, the government's on the rope, they have a strong and enthusiastic organization and base ready to do well. It says to me that the Conservatives are picking up. It's going to be a challenge for them, given how sudden their uptick is, to get that organization in place, to identify and pull vote. But they're in a much, much stronger situation now than they were a year ago. And if you're BC United, you're probably dealing with a dispirited, downtrodden organization, and it's going to be a real challenge for Kevin Falcon to motivate those folks to do the work that's needed to be competitive and hold on to seats.
Well, United often said, that no matter how bad things got, they had the advantage of experience and the advantage of money compared to the Conservatives. They could run a more professional campaign, be the adults in the room. But if these fundraising numbers stay the same, they seem to lose that financial advantage going in.
You better have some really good donuts in those BC United campaign offices, or no one's going to show up, because folks see the headlines, folks see the polls, they see the movement, and Falcon's got to rally them. And if donuts is all they've got, go to Cardam's or Empire or Lucky's and pick up a whole bunch, because you'll need it.
They don't have the money, Jeff. They don't have the money. They need those are expensive donuts. Go to Tim Hortons.
Can I
Jillian,
one
Ellie.
point to the observation of people? I think it's important to note there is a advantage for the BC United in that they still have constituency funds. And so what I've noticed as well is that these incumbent MLAs have spent full page ads on Canada Day. I've seen more bus shelter ads for MLAs right now than I've ever seen before. Not uncommon, right? We're in an election year, but they will have the advantage of being seen as their head above water, because they're using taxpayer dollar constituency funds to put out some of this promotional material before they have to use the election donations closer to. So, something to watch out for a little bit there too.
Jillian, you've run and helped run campaigns before. We're in the second quarter. I know it's different. The timeline this year is different because the election's in October, but we're in the second quarter. There's sort of one more quarter, but like the money that parties bring in right now, how important is it? Jeff's kind of alluded to, the printing pamphlets and that type of thing. But at this point in the electoral cycle, when you've got candidates and offices and printing things and signs and preparing, like how important is it to have the money that they need in order to do that?
Yeah, it's critical. All those things are expensive. It can make a difference on if you can, do a mail drop throughout one of your target ridings, if you're able to increase an ad buy in ridings that you might be, just behind in a couple points closer to election day. So yeah, these funds can make a huge difference between, being able to have just sort of the basics of a campaign or, being able to really give everything that you've got, which really can, I've seen that move margins, especially in 2017 for us. The ad buys that we did towards the end of the campaign, I think helped, increase the seat count probably from 2 to 3 for the Green. So it's critical right now. It's go time. And it's going to be really interesting to see how they put it to work. I think that's the other thing with the Conservatives and United is how are they operating internally? Are they going to have a cohesive strategy? Are they even going to be able to spend all the money? And if they do they do it in a coherent way that contributes to a winnable strategy? I think that's a huge question mark that we don't know yet.
I want to move on to another topic here, which is sudden, kind of last minute retirements from some NDP cabinet ministers. We had 3 in the last week: Labour Minister Harry Bains, Transportation Minister Rob Fleming, and Forest Minister Bruce Ralston. I'd say it's kind of late in this cycle. We're like 2.5 months from the writ drop here for ministers to be announcing that they're going, but that's just my thoughts. I wonder, Jeff, what you made of this and the idea that it's a little bit late for if you can expand it even further if you want into Katrine Conroy and Murray Rankin, who in the last month before that announced their retirements as well. What do you think of the timing?
I think the timing of these three ministers resigning, and that's announcing that they're not going to seek re-election, Harry Baines, Rob Fleming, and Bruce Ralston, has more to do with their sense of there's work that I want to finish as a cabinet minister. And if I announce that I'm not seeking re-election sooner, it's going to be harder for me to get that work done. And so I think that's what weighed on them in making their decision and making the timing now. This isn't they would have notified the premier. There was no. I've heard it speculated in some circles that the premier told them that they're not going to be cabinet ministers next time around, and that's why they stepped away. That conversation did not happen. It's 100% not that. It would be a really stupid thing for a premier to do, to give people who have to work really hard a disincentive to do that hard work in an election. They've been around for 20 years in politics. That's a long time.
I wanted to just follow up on that. Do you think, is it fair to the premier, for cabinet ministers, any premier, who usually asks 6 to 12 months before an election, are you running again, to his caucus to get a sense of who is and isn't, so he can make sure that people have priority files for continuity if they win again, to shuffle new ministers in, if they need portfolios and ridings where backbenchers maybe need that elevation? Is it fair for veterans to sort of hang on to their portfolio by hedging and humming and hawing? Harry Baines told me, he told the premier he was in when he asked. He thought he had another term, and then he had some personal developments and decided not to. They get to keep their portfolio right up until the end, but at the cost of the premier's flexibility, and you might make an argument at the betterment of all the sort of NDP caucus.
Yeah, no, life happens, right? And you might say to the premier at one point, I'm all in, and then things happen and you change your mind. And here I have the delightful Mainliner magazine. Happy 30th anniversary to the Main Island Library. And here's this month's thing, and then you got, an Adam Olsen ad. And Adam Olsen is a fellow who also a really strong MLA, as we've talked about on this show, and was fully intending to reoffer in the election, but then had some, three friends of his pass away, and caused him to reflect on what he wanted to do in his life, and decided to step away and take on a different role in the Green campaign. And I think that these are human beings, and these things happen. And I think that should be okay. I will say that political parties can benefit from renewal. There are folks who are saying this is a big, huge loss of folks from the NDP, cabinet ministers. I think it's good that you have turnover. You get new candidates like Baltej Singh Dhillon and Randeen Neal, bring fresh ideas and energy. And if you don't believe it in politics, I'll point to you to the rock band AC/DC, who, when Bon Scott passed away, Brian Johnson came in, new lead singer, and the first thing they did was they dropped Back in Black, 50 million copies. So renewal is important, and it can work.
Jillian, there's 5 cabinet ministers whose ridings now are potentially, they don't have an incumbent advantage in them in places like Victoria, Swan Lake, and Oak Bay, Gordon Head, 2 Surrey ridings, Kootenay, Monashee. What does that do for those ridings, do you think? Traditionally, they feel like they might have been safer NDP ridings, but does the changeover affect the kind of election fight?
It's going to depend on each of those local races, and I think the provincial campaigns from the opponents. Obviously, Oak Bay Gordon Head is a target for the Greens. I think Conservatives are hoping to be more competitive in Surrey. So I think a lot of that depends. The NDP is still in a very strong position, not just because of their fundraising, but I think if we look at the polls right now and all of the underlying data that we've been talking about the last few episodes, the NDP are in a really strong position, which I imagine played into some of this decision making. People didn't feel like they were going to be damaging the party too much by moving on. So yeah, they make those ridings a little bit more interesting to watch for sure, but I don't think it's like a huge risk.
I do think, this is just me, but I do think it is interesting that we saw George Heyman announce his retirement earlier and a kind of war within his riding for the nomination, which ticked a bunch of people in the NDP off. You know, there was still time for people to sign up members. This is so late in the game for places like Victoria, Swan Lake. There's no time to sign up members. The riding association and the existing member base is going to choose the next candidate / potentially MLA. And I do think there's maybe an argument to be made in a kind of cynical way, which I'll take the cynical point of view for the first time in the history of the show, that, you know, it's easy if you're an MLA on the way out the door and you want to keep your cabinet post and you want to make sure you can appoint a successor, you wait to the last possible minute and then off you go, hand it over to someone who has the votes within the riding, and you don't worry about the left-leaning Anjali Paterai climate group coming in and taking over your riding. I don't know, Ellie. I'm being a little cynical here, but did that ever cross your mind when you were looking at it?
That's exactly what crossed my mind. Now, granted, the points that both Jillian and Jeff made about, you know, life circumstances, like I do think that there's a lot of validity to that, but I like to stir the pot a little bit here. So there could be, I like to live in a world where things might be a little bit more politically dramatic. And that's exactly it. By a departure so close to the election, this also means that instead of nomination processes, that there could just be appointments, which make it a lot easier for the premier to hand select some of his people into those positions in ridings that are more likely to stay NDP. The other is, again, let's just stir the pot here a little bit, where it's a lot harder to maintain rainbows and sunshines when you've been in politics for so long too. And the NDP are now going to go into what I believe will be another mandate for them. And so a lot more blamed to the NDP for things that are happening in BC. And so to retire on a high note might also be something in consideration for these departures too.
Mm-hmm. George Costanza says, always leave on a high note. That's Jeff?
If we're
really quick, we only have 30 seconds.
If we're stirring the pot, let me just stir the pot some more and say that the NDP's rule to have a 90-day cutoff of nominations before an actual nomination vote in a riding is stupid. It prevents a party from having renewal, from signing up new members, to building the organization, to getting folks excited. And you end up with a smaller pool of candidates and all sorts of folks who want to get involved who won't get involved because they're pushed aside by like the 120 riding association members. But at least the NDP has nomination votes, unlike the Conservatives and the BC United. The Greens have votes too. Good on them.
Okay. All right. Great. Thank you to the panel for being here and sharing your pets this week. And thank you for watching. We'll be back with all the latest in BC politics next week here on Political Capital. Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn more at uber.com/flexibilityworks.